20 or 21 further south. Still a few of those heavy downpours around as we go into the evening rush hour. So, again, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. As I mentioned, though, northwest Scotland's largely staying dry and fine. It's going to get warmer here over the next few days. A bit late, but finally some signs of summer in the far northwest. Elsewhere, well, you will have to watch out for the heavy showers developing. They're going to be hit and miss, but parts of the M1, the M25 in particular, seeing a lot of spray and surface water for this evening. As we go through the night, if anything, the rain's going to pep up across the south. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. That rain could cause some problems as it continues through the night and into the early part of tomorrow. Further north, the showers should tend to fade and most places will become dry. Again, temperatures well down into single figures on the west coast of Scotland, but further south, actually, still quite warm, double digits, staying in the teens across the southeast. But potentially tomorrow, more heavy rain to come across parts of South Wales, southern parts of the Midlands, and especially southern England. Heavy downpours, possibility of the odd rumble of thunder as well. So again, likely to cause some issues, certainly on the roads, and potentially could cause some flooding by the end of the day in some locations. Further north, many places will actually be dry and fine, and temperatures, again, high teens for most of us.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In Dumfries and Galloway, the A75 is closed each way at Girthon after an accident causing queues. On Merseyside, the A567 is closed each way along Stanley Road in Bootle after an accident. On the M6 in Staffordshire, 2 out of 4 lanes are closed southbound, where a lorry's broken down at junction 13 south of Stafford, with queues from junction 12 for the A5. In Powys, the A489 is closed each way at Kerry for an investigation causing queues. A couple of problems in Essex. The A120 is partly blocked, where a lorry's broken down between Horsley Cross and Ramsey, causing delays. And the A130 is closed southbound from the Bonvilles roundabout to the A13 at the Sadler's Farm roundabout at North Benfleet after an accident with long delays towards there and as you divert. And the M27 in Hampshire is partly blocked westbound by an accident at junction 12 at Portsmouth, causing delays. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This Bank Holiday Monday will be celebrating National Dog Day by uncovering how many pet owners would rather spend the bank holiday with their pet over their partner. In fact, new research has uncovered the 5 key personas that make up Generation Pet. That's a new wave of post-pandemic pet owners, with 58% saying they worry about their pet being diagnosed with a serious illness. Well, joining us now to tell us more about how we should be caring for our pampered pooches is Dr. Edwina Gildia.
Some of the interesting facts coming through that is that 80% of us think that pet as part of the family. The new pet owners who have come on board during the pandemic, there's a lot to learn with being a new pet owner. Interesting facts, as you mentioned, a third of pet owners are preferring to spend time with their pet this weekend over their partner. 60% of pet owners, and dog, which is specifically calling them out, say that their dog improves their mental health, and 55% noting that improves their physical health by getting out and about.
It's also about showing that love and appreciation for these animals which don't ask anything of us but love. That
was another point that came through this research that we did at Zoetis UK, is that they bring a purpose to life, and I think that's another thing to call out. It's so important for ourselves, for society, to have that purpose, but with that comes responsibility. And that's ensuring that we do support their health, and we know how to do that as well.
If you'd rather spend your bank holiday with your dog than your partner, maybe we've got too much of an over-reliance on our pets?
I think it depends on what way you look at it. For some people, it may be a connection. I think it's a positive thing that we have, and we should celebrate it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, 9:30 on Wednesday, the 4th of September, live across the UK. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Good morning. So, crisis in the Channel. Migrants are continuing to cross the waters this morning. 12 people, including a pregnant woman and 6 children, of course, died yesterday. That was the deadliest crossing disaster in recent times, but it's clearly no deterrent.
And private school tax rate, as many as 1 in 5 private schools could risk closing with Sir Keir Starmer's VAT raid on fees. What is this going to do to state schools?
And is the right to buy going to be abolished? Angela Rayner is preparing to rip up Margaret Thatcher's right to buy policy, despite benefiting from the council house scheme herself.
And finally, the Grenfell inquiry report. The report into the disaster that claimed the lives of 72 people in 2017 will be published in its final form today.
And a campaign for change. Dame Esther Ranson has issued a heartfelt plea to MPs to allow a vote on assisted dying when tomorrow they have the chance to introduce a private member's bill. We're going to be talking to Esther's daughter.
Had enough, Harry? Prince Harry has reportedly sought advice on how to mastermind a return to the UK, but says he's got no interest in returning to resume his royal duties. But would you take him back anyway?
PMQs, of course, today. First one back. So these pictures, which we're getting live from the channel this morning, which we'll continue to bring you, they're not going to land particularly well for Starmer.
They're shocking, because you might have thought, with 12 people perishing in the sea yesterday, that would have been a deterrent. Absolutely not.
No.
Dozens and dozens getting onto dinghies in full view of the French police, who, frankly, I think, turn a blind eye or almost encourage it, because they want them out of their hair.
Now, of course, it's a Grenfell inquiry this morning. That will be happening at 11. 7 years that inquiry has been going on. There could be some revelations that come out of that. Who is going to get the blame? Will there be criminal prosecutions taken against people who are involved in that? And, of course, if you are one of those affected this morning, no doubt you'll be watching that keenly. GBNews.com/your say is the portal on which you can let us know your thoughts. Get involved with the show first at the very latest news with Sam Francis.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Good morning to you, just after 9:30. And we'll start then with that news we've been covering over the last hour or so. If you've been with us during breakfast, you will have seen footage of French police storming a beach as dozens of migrants scrambled to get their boats into the water on the French coast and set course across the English Channel. Dramatic footage also showing people wading out into the water, many not wearing life jackets before pushing away from the shore. That comes just hours after 12 people died attempting to make that crossing, including, sadly, a pregnant woman and 6 children, after the bottom of their boat ripped open, according to authorities in France. Well, that disaster yesterday adds to a growing death toll, with 226 people, including 35 children, thought to be either missing or dead after attempting the crossing this year alone. As we heard from Andrew and Bev, a long-awaited report on the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people, is set to be published today after over 7 years. The final report will focus on the roles of corporate firms, the local authority and the London Fire Brigade, amid calls for it to prompt significant change. Bereaved families have described the delay in justice as unbearable, with the police inquiry not expected to conclude until 2025. 4 of the 5 children arrested over the murder of 8-year-old Beam Coley have been released without charge. Coley was attacked while walking his dog in Franklin Park near Leicester on Sunday and later died in hospital. A 14-year-old boy, though, does remain in police custody as investigations continue. The group, aged between 12 and 14, were initially arrested on suspicion of murder after a post-mortem revealed the victim died from a neck injury. Police are now urging anyone with information about that attack to come forward. England's GP services face a critical tipping point, according to a new study. Researchers from the University College London found that while NHS workforces have grown by 20%, the number of GPs per 1,000 patients has fallen by 15%. GP practices have also dropped by 20% over the last decade, despite an 11% rise in patient registrations. Concerns are growing over the increasing reliance on non-medical staff, with experts warning this could impact the quality of care. But the government has promised reforms, including hiring more GPs and raising pay. Well, Conservative MPs will kick off the first round of voting today to choose a successor to Rishi Sunak. That initial ballot, set for this afternoon, will begin narrowing the field of 6 candidates, with further rounds throughout September, whittling those contenders down. They include James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Dame Priti Patel, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride and Kemi Badenoch. And an exam board is warning that GCSE students are taking too many exams, spending more than 30 hours in tests, among the highest across the globe. OCR, one of the main UK exam boards, is calling for a reduction in the number of intensity of exams, proposing a shift towards a more balanced and relevant curriculum, they say. That report, backed by education figures, comes as the government's also launching its own review into curriculum and assessments. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at the top of the hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Very good morning, 9:36. This is Britain's Newsroom, live across the UK on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Well, you would have thought, wouldn't you, after the worst fatal crossing yesterday, 12 people dying, 6 children and a pregnant woman, that might have stayed the hand of the criminal gangs or even the migrants, but they are, as we speak, coming across the channel again. They
are. We've got live pictures this morning of the coast of northern France and seeing huge numbers, dozens of people coming across. The French Coast Guard has confirmed the deaths of up to 65 people who were rescued off the coast of Cap Gris-Nez on Tuesday also. Charlie Peters is with us now. Charlie, we're looking at these live pictures this morning. Oh, these aren't live, apparently. This is earlier today. But just explain to us what we've been seeing this morning on some of these images. And what does this tell us about the situation with the illegal migrants?
Sure. About 2 hours ago, a couple of boats had already started the journey across the channel. This morning, one boat made it into UK waters and was escorted to Dover by one of the Border Force vehicles. Now, our producer in Kent says up to about 16 people on board that vessel. Some 300 arrived yesterday, despite that tragedy off the coast of northern France. But in the last half hour or so, we have seen a third boat depart from northern France with dozens on board, as you said, Bev. Many of them wearing life jackets. But I think the most stunning part of that extraordinary footage is that when the boat's already in the water and making its way out towards the channel, additional people come running out across the beach, not necessarily originally associated with the plan to launch that boat, and try and jump on. And that is part of a pattern that has been repeated quite regularly in the last couple of years, leading to many of these fatalities. It's highly likely that could have contributed to what happened yesterday. Particularly, we were told yesterday by the French authorities that those involved yesterday could have been of Eritrean heritage. We're seeing more and more African gangs and migrants being involved in this attempt to sabotage and jump onto boats that have already launched. Many of the people smuggling operations involve people from Iran and also from South Asia, but it's particularly the African migrants who are involved in this strategy of jumping once already launched, not paying the thousands of dollars required to make the crossing. Now, the French authorities say that they stop 60 to 70% of attempted crossings, and we've seen that. Well, we have seen some dramatic footage of them preventing launches, police officers rushing out, slashing the rubber on these dinghies. And we should stress, these are custom-made boats. This is not an amateur operation. When Keir Starmer talks about smashing the gangs, he's talking about $1 billion organised criminal gang industry. These are custom-made boats made to order in China, smuggled through Turkey into Europe by organised criminal enterprises that have strategy. They've got the means, they have the money, and they have a relentless supply line of people who want to make it into Britain.
What are these pictures we're looking at here, Charlie? Just explain to our viewers at home, and also if you're listening on the radio.
Yeah, so those are people running towards a boat that's already been launched. That's the process I was describing just now, where people who haven't necessarily paid the fee jump on to one of these small boats. This is northern France, and as you can see, there are French authorities chasing after them. I'd say jogging towards, because the problem the authorities have in their defence is that once the boat's already out to sea, they're quite limited in their powers to prevent them from going further. So the tactics and procedures from the French authorities has been typically to slash the boats before they're launched, when they're on the beach, where they're uncovered by these very slick, very organised criminal gangs. Once they're in the water, it's increasingly difficult for them to prevent a crossing. That's what the French authorities will say.
Charlie, those French police officers are running in slow motion. They are not attempting to catch up. They're not making any proper effort to thwart that latest crossing, despite knowing 12 people died yesterday.
12 people died yesterday, and many more people are expected to make this journey. I mean, we revealed this morning 2 already crossing, a third, as we've just seen, launching, definitely overladen. We saw dozens of people on the sides of that boat. But GB News sources have also told us that there are some 3,000 people waiting along the coastline from Calais and Dunkirk all the way down to Boulogne-sur-Mer, which is where this incident happened yesterday. The typical strategy for the people smuggling operation is to keep people further inland and then suddenly rush them forward hours before the launch to evade authorities and detection, to prevent the strategy for disruption that the French have. But potentially they're so emboldened at the moment. We have 3,000, according to our sources, waiting just by the coast, prepared at any moment to launch the sort of small boat crossing attempt that we've seen already this morning.
We give hundreds of millions to the French police every year to try and stop this. Well, from what I could see there, they weren't earning their money.
We just to look at the numbers of this a bit. So 2022, there's 46,000 people came across on
small
boats
town
in this way. 2023, that actually fell to 29,500. So there was a short, it did reduce there. And then this year, so far, we know that there's more than 21,000 so far this more, and more than 5,000 since Labour came to power.
And also, we are currently ahead of where we were this time last year. So it seems highly likely, if not almost certain, that we will exceed that 29,000 later on, especially based on the sort of presence of the strategies that we're seeing at the moment, with people waiting on the coastline. 3,000 waiting to go at any moment as it currently stands.
OK, thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much. Now, of course, we're looking at these pictures, and people at home will be feeling angry, actually, because why? Because what we see are people who are coming here to be supported by the state, predominantly, or to escape into the illegal economy, onto the black market to go and work illegally, whilst we feel that we can't afford anything in our houses, right? We can't afford our shopping. We can't get an appointment with the GP. It feels like this country is already very busy. Our guest, Kay Marsh, now, who is a migrant support coordinator. Kay, you might feel differently when you see these pictures. How do you feel when you see images of what are, no doubt, desperate people jumping on those dinghies?
It's tragic, isn't it? I mean, what forces these people into this situation? I find it very difficult to believe that it's benefits. Especially, yesterday we saw a lot of people lose their life, women, children. It really does question the narrative that's put out, doesn't it, about people. There's quite clearly desperate people who would put themselves and their family on this boat unless they had no other choice.
But, Kay, a lot of people listening and watching will be thinking, yeah, OK, maybe they're desperate. But what is the lure of Britain if it's not it's our benefit system? Because they're in France, which is a safe country. It's a safe country.
It is, but France do take a lot. All European countries take a lot of people, and a lot of people do settle. The majority of people do settle in other countries, but everybody needs to sort of chip in and help. When people have lost their homes, I understand that, you can't get a GP appointment. It's difficult. I'm struggling myself. I completely understand the cost of living crisis. But these are people who are in an even worse situation. So why can't we just learn to share the resources that we have?
But we are. But we 675,000 people arrived in this country legally last year.
I do understand. The issue is a broken system. It's not. We are sharing, yes, when people arrive, but it's the way they're arriving. People are dying in the Channel because our system is broken. We need to complete overhaul of the immigration system. We need an alternative, safe and legal routes to asylum, so people can be brought here safely and legally without needing to risk their lives in a small boat.
And what are the barriers to that, Kay? And what does that look like? So what you mean is people in their country of origin applying, presumably online, to see whether they would qualify for asylum status here?
Potentially. You know, there are a number of different things that we could look at. You know, if it was actually put on the table as a serious thing to talk about as a solution to this issue, humanitarian visas were used for the Ukrainian situation. People were brought here very quickly when they needed to be, very safely. They didn't have to navigate small boats or the asylum system at all. We've seen that it works very successfully. If we can build a processing centre in Rwanda, we can build a processing centre in northern France, where people can start their claim before needing to get onto a boat. And we can do the initial assessments, work out who has a legitimate claim to asylum and bring them here safely. Then anybody found not to have a legitimate claim who might try and sneak in the back door, as it were, on a small boat, we would have a lot more grounds to sort of scoop them up and return them somewhere.
But I don't think France wants us to have a processing centre there. I think they want the processing centre to be in Britain, and the view here is then if they come here to be processed, they'll disappear.
They are coming here to be processed, and you know, we know that the asylum backlog is huge, and the amount of people currently going through the asylum system is astronomical. So we know that people don't just disappear into the ether. You know, it's not as big an issue as some people like to make out. People come here because they want safety.
Kay, I really want your opinion on this. As somebody that supports the migrants, what do you make of Keir Starmer's plan to smash the gangs? Is that going to work?
It just feels like more government rhetoric. You know, it's just something that people can say, you know, that they can't do immediately, but it's be seen to be doing something, you know. What I really want to see, the biggest change I want to see around immigration is putting the argument for safe and legal routes to asylum really seriously on the table and go, we need to admit now these deterrents aren't working. Can we just try this? We've tried literally everything else. It's time to try safe and legal routes to asylum.
OK. All right. Thank you so much. Kay Marsh there, Migrant Support Coordinator. Interesting take on it. Right, up next. Do schools have too many exams? Well, exam boards think the volume and intensity is too much. The kids have gone back to school today.
You sound relieved.
Goodness.
You sound very relieved.
Oh, if you're at home with a cup of coffee, I'm with you, because the kids have just gone back. Get in touch. Let me know how it feels. GBNews.com/yoursay. Don't go anywhere.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Sarah, welcome to the show. Obviously, you work for a tobacco company, so a little caveat there to slip in. Nevertheless, it's no surprise that the illegal market is growing so much. When you look at the cost of cigarettes in Britain, huge amounts of duty, and oftentimes, of course, criminality always finds its way into the system. Tell us more about your report.
Absolutely. I mean, up to 90% of a packet of cigarettes is tax. And in the last year, there's been 2 tax increases that have equated more to the last 3 years combined. So now, if you're a roll-your-own smoker, a 30-gram pouch of roll-your-own will cost £22.50, but you can buy a counterfeit pack of 50 grams for £3. So there's a massive disparity. A lot of illegal tobacco is imported, but we do also have a problem in the UK with illegal tobacco factories. So in the last month, there's been an illegal tobacco factory in Gateshead, in Bury, busted, producing roll-your-own tobacco. And on the 12th of July this month, West Midlands gang illegal tobacco factory, the gang was found guilty of producing illegal tobacco, and that was more than £5 million lost tax revenue to the government. And actually, all of those people found guilty got a suspended sentence.
And how does that work? They're literally importing container loads of raw tobacco and packaging it up in factories in Britain. And they're using what appears to be British packaging illegally?
Yeah, some of it is branded packaging, so some of it isn't the kind of unbranded packaging we'd see on cigarettes and roll your own now, but it's relatively simple to reproduce, especially RYO. Our own pack swap data now shows that about 50% of the roll your own market is illegal tobacco.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. It is 9:50. Bev and Andrew here with you on a Wednesday morning.
Well, it's uncertainty for many because schools go back today because research has shown as many as 1 in 5 private schools could be closed because of the Labour government's decision to put VAT on fees.
That's right. So supposedly it will be the lesser known schools, particularly those outside of London and in the south east. But what will it do for state schools?
We're joined by former head teacher and the chairman of the Campaign for All Education, Chris McGovern. Chris, morning to you. There were figures being put around before the election suggesting Labour's VAT rate on private schools could see perhaps 45,000 pupils leaving private schools, having to go into the state sector. And as we know, most schools are pretty overcrowded already. If these figures are right, 1 in 5 schools, that figure's going to be a lot higher.
It looks like it, doesn't it? I mean, from the point of view of the Labour Party, they're throwing red meat to their far left. And I say that I'm not politically affiliated. I've taught in both the state sector and the private sector, and I sat on the TUC. But I think, what's going on here is the politics of envy, really. It's also extremely stupid because we are going to see a movement of a considerable number of children from private schools into the state sector. That's going to put pressure onto state schools, certainly in certain areas of the country, quite a lot of pressure. And we're going to be the only country in the world, that taxes education. Our private schools are a success story. Even in those superstar education systems like Singapore, Shanghai, South Korea, Japan, they send their children to some of our private schools and they know it's a great system. So why would you want to wreck a good system? The way forward, and the Campaign for Re-Education has said this for many years, is to raise the standards of teaching and attainment in state schools. So there won't be so much need for private schools. You go back several decades now when we got rid of grammar schools. Suddenly, private schools blossomed. If we'd kept grammar schools, we wouldn't need so many private schools. They might wither on the vine even. But if I had my way, I think probably I would move to a bilateral system so that we have comprehensive schools which have a grammar school stream and a vocational stream. But look, the politics of envy, I think, here, disastrous move and an incredibly stupid move, but done for political reasons.
It's a vindictive policy, in my opinion, Chris, and it won't affect the super rich. We saw over the weekend, I think there was figures that Eton now, to board at Eton, will cost about £65,000 a year. If you're one of those people who send your child to Eton, you're possibly not British as well. This is the other thing that people don't realise. How many people in private schools now, particularly boarding schools, are foreign, are either live overseas or are originally from a different country. They work in the oil and gas industry, for instance, and they send their children here. This isn't going to affect them. Who, in your opinion, understanding parents at schools, who will be most hit by this, Chris?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, these famous schools have plenty of applicants. They're not going to be affected. It's the middle of the road, the average private school, which caters for parents who can, often from fairly modest backgrounds, who save, don't go on holiday, and they can just about afford the fees. Many of them will be on bursaries, so those bursaries will disappear, of course. What's going to happen now is the gulf between, if you like, the children in private schools and those in state schools is going to widen. And what else is going to happen? It doesn't get reported. We've got the Paralympics taking place now. We've just had the Olympics in Paris. Half of those medal winners in Paris are from private schools. And we're going to damage one part of our, great national achievement is sport. And lots of things private schools do very well. We come back to this question. Leave the private schools to do a good job. we've got to make sure that the state schools do a good job rather than dragging people down. We've got to raise people up.
I couldn't agree more. Right, thank you so much, Chris. Chris McGovern there. And he's right, because the states, also the private schools with those amazing sports facilities, often loan them out to the local schools as well.
14 years of Tory government, no extra grammar schools.
Don't go anywhere, here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning, time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Another day you'll need the umbrella handy. It is a day of dodging the downpours. There will be some sunshine around, but most areas will see a few showers as well. Some heavy ones already across parts of northern England and southern Scotland, and we'll see more developing through the day. But it's not raining everywhere. Northwest Scotland, for example, largely fine here, much brighter day compared to yesterday. But we'll see the showers just brewing up more widely, certainly by this afternoon. Some heavy ones likely over eastern England, more scattered over Wales and southwest England, where again there'll be a bit of sunshine, lifting the temperatures only into the mid-teens across the north, maybe 20 or 21 further south. Still a few of those heavy downpours around as we go into the evening rush hour. So again, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. As I mentioned though, northwest Scotland's largely staying dry and fine. It's going to get warmer here over the next few days. A bit late, but finally some signs of summer in the far northwest. Elsewhere, well, you will have to watch out for the heavy showers developing. They're going to be hit and miss, but parts of the M1, the M25 in particular, seeing a lot of spray and surface water for this evening. As we go through the night, if anything, the rain's going to pep up across the south. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. That rain could cause some problems as it continues through the night and into the early part of tomorrow. Further north, the showers should tend to fade and most places will become dry. Again, temperatures well down into single figures on the west coast of Scotland, but further south, actually, still quite warm, double digits, staying in the teens across the southeast. But potentially tomorrow, more heavy rain to come across parts of South Wales, southern parts of the Midlands, and especially southern England. Heavy downpours, possibility of the odd rumble of thunder as well. So again, likely to cause some issues, certainly on the roads, and potentially could cause some flooding by the end of the day in some locations. Further north, many places will actually be dry and fine, and temperatures again high teens for most of us.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In Dumfries and Galloway, the A75 is closed west of Gurthon after an accident causing delays. On the M62 in West Yorkshire, there's a lane closed where someone's broken down on the westbound exit at junction 32 at Pontefract, causing delays. On Merseyside, the A567 is closed each way along Stanley Road in Bootle with a spillage. On the M6 in Staffordshire, 2 out of 4 lanes are closed southbound where a lorry's broken down between junction 13 south of Stafford and 12 for the A5, causing queues. In Powys, the A489 is closed each way at Kerry for an investigation, causing queues. A couple of problems in Essex. The A120 is partly blocked where a lorry's broken down between Horsley Cross and Ramsey, causing delays. And the A130 is closed southbound from the Bonvilles roundabout to the A13 Sadler's Farm roundabout at North Benfleet after an accident with long delays on approaches to there. And train services are suspended between Taunton and Bristol Temple Meads because of an incident.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
How would you? Good luck.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Morning, it's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 4th of September, live across the UK. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
The Grenfell Inquiry report finally into the disaster which claimed the lives of 72 people in 2017. It will be published in its final form today, so stay tuned for that.
And how would you feel about right to buy being abolished? Angela Rayner is preparing to rip up Margaret Thatcher's right to buy policy, despite previously benefiting from the council house scheme herself.
And a campaign for change. Dame Esther Ranson has issued a heartfelt plea to MPs to allow a vote on assisted dying when tomorrow they have a chance to introduce a private member's bill.
And have you had enough of Harry?
Yes.
Prince Harry has reportedly sought advice on how to mastermind a return to the UK. But he says that he has no interest in resuming his royal duties. Do you think the country would like to see him come back?
I think the country wouldn't mind him coming back as long as he left his wife in California.
Oh,
with the children.
Andrew Pearce.
Sorry.
That isn't a very kind thing to say,
I think
is
that's
it?
what people think.
No, I don't want to see any marriage with children break up.
No, I would hate to see the
I
breakup.
would hate to see that. So you can't have him coming back without his wife, can you?
Well, people don't like her. And they blame her for the fact he's estranged now not from his own family.
Well,
she's estranged from her family, he's estranged from his. There's a pattern of behaviour here.
Yeah, but he's not got a gun to his head.
No,
he's an
true.
adult man.
He is.
The architect
He
of
is.
his own destiny.
He is.
I'm not going to blame Meghan for the
Yeah.
fact that he has made some silly mistakes.
Yeah.
I think they're both to blame.
Yeah.
But would you want to see them come back? GBNews.com/your say. First, though, the very latest news. I can feel your head shaking. With Sam Francis.
Bev, Andrew, thank you very much and good morning to you. Just gone 2 minutes past 10 and we'll start with news from France where police have stormed a beach this morning as dozens of migrants scramble to get their boats into the water and make that journey across the English Channel. Dramatic footage here shows people wading out into the water, many not wearing life jackets, before pushing away from the shore, and it comes just hours after 12 people died attempting to make that crossing, including a pregnant woman and sadly 6 children after the bottom of their boat ripped open. That disaster adds to a growing death toll with now 226 people, including 35 children thought to be missing or dead after attempting the crossing this year alone. Well, a long-awaited report on the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people, is set to be published after over 7 years. The final inquiry report will focus on the roles of corporate firms, the local authority and London Fire Brigade, amid calls for it to prompt significant change. Bereaved families have described the delay in justice as unbearable, with the police inquiry not expected to conclude until 2025. The Fire Brigades Union has labelled the fire as a crime because of deregulation and institutional failings. 4 of the 5 children arrested over the murder of 8-year-old Bim Coley have been released without charge. Coley was attacked while walking his dog in Franklin Park near Leicester on Sunday and later died in hospital. A 14-year-old boy remains in police custody as investigations continue. That group, aged between 12 and 14, were initially arrested on suspicion of murder after a post-mortem revealed Coley died from a neck injury. Police are now urging anyone with information about that attack to come forward. England's GP services are facing a critical tipping point, according to a new survey. Researchers from London University College found that while the NHS workforce grew by 20% from 2015 to 2022, the number of GPs per 1,000 patients fell by 15%. GP practices also dropped by 20% over the last decade, despite an 11% rise in patient regulations. Concerns are growing over the increasing reliance on non-medical staff, with experts warning it could impact the quality of care, though the government has promised reforms, including hiring more GPs and raising their pay. Millions of pensioners are set to lose their winter fuel payments under new government plans, which is sparking concerns among campaigners and some MPs. That move to address a £22 billion budget shortfall will restrict payments to those on pension credit, leaving around 1.6 million low-income pensioners without support. Former Pensions Minister Sir Steve Webb is warning it will hit the poorest the hardest, while others suggest targeting payments by council tax bands could be a fairer option. Critics, though, including Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey, are calling for an urgent rethink as energy bills rise. Conservative MPs will kick off the first round of voting today to choose a successor to Rishi Sunak. The initial ballot set for this afternoon will begin narrowing the field of 6 candidates down, with further rounds throughout September, whittling it down even further. The contenders include James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Dame Priti Patel, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride and Kemi Badenoch. An exam board is warning today that GCSE students are taking too many exams and spending more than 30 hours in tests. That's among the highest globally. OCR, one of the main exam boards, is calling for a reduction in the number and intensity of exams, proposing a shift towards a more balanced and relevant curriculum. That report, backed by various education figures, comes as the government's launched its own review into curriculum and assessment. Anti-fraud campaigners are warning people to be cautious as they return to their busy schedules after the summer break. The Take 5 to Stop Fraud campaign suggests that the back-to-the-grind feeling in September can make people more vulnerable to scams. A survey found nearly half of people are more likely to lose focus or take risks with financial offers when they're busy. Pop-up events in London, in Manchester and in Glasgow are being held this week to remind the public to stop and think before sharing money or personal information. Sir Brian May has revealed he suffered a minor stroke last week, which briefly impaired his arm. In an Instagram video, the 77-year-old said he's now doing OK, but that he won't be driving, flying or doing any strenuous activity. The Queen guitarist described the incident as, well, a little scary, but praised the care of the team that he received at hospital. He's also reassured fans that he can still play guitar. And finally, in the sports news, Dame Sarah Storey has added another medal to her career. She clinched her 18th Paralympic gold in the women's C5 time trial, completing the 14.1-kilometre course in just 20 minutes and 22 seconds. The 46-year-old British cyclist who started her sporting journey in swimming now boasts an incredible 29 Paralympic medals, solidifying her status as GB's most decorated Paralympian. Congratulations to her. Well, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Your next update in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello and welcome. This is Britain's Newsroom, live across the UK on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So migrants are continuing to cross the Channel this morning, despite the news yesterday that a pregnant woman and 6 children were amongst 12 people who died after their boat sank.
Campaigners and some MPs are calling for the people responsible. Actually, we can look at... sorry about that.
We're going to go on to that.
The images that we've seen this morning of the French police don't shock me, but they just make me angry.
Well, they make our inbox angry as well.
They're making no attempt to stop those young men, all young men, running into the sea to jump into the dinghies. And from what we were hearing from Charlie Peters, they haven't even paid for their fare across the Channel. The
thing
French
is,
police don't care.
If you were a police officer on that beach and you know how desperate those people are to get on those boats because, as you say, they've paid a huge amount of money. Yeah. Some of them will just want to economically better themselves. Some of them will be genuinely escaping war zones. Those people are going to do everything possible to get on that boat. If you're a police officer and you try to stop them, you are highly likely to be injured in the process of trying to do that.
Because French police are armed, unlike our police.
But are they going to? They're not going to use it under those circumstances. Imagine the outcry to shoot a
migrant,
or asylum
seeker, a refugee.
So it's just a mess. It's a complete mess.
And it's getting worse. And of course, Labour, we don't know whether the Rwanda plan would ever have worked, but on day one they cancelled that Rwanda plan, where by now, presumably, a plane would have been up in the air.
Yeah.
Even if it was, would that be a deterrent? Well, there was evidence that people were moving from Northern Ireland into Southern Ireland because they feared that they could be, because Northern Ireland being part of Britain, they could end up in Rwanda. That was reported. So there was evidence it could have been a deterrent, and Labour scrapped it. We spent all that money with the Rwandan authorities.
You just can't help but think that maybe this new Labour government might have said, we're just going to... OK, we'll try. We'll try the Rwanda. We
think it's a stupid gimmick,
this country has invested £400 million of taxpayers' money into this so far, and we've not had one person on that plane. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it a go, and we're going to be honest with the public about the fact that this would not be Plan A if we had been at the start of this process.
But as we don't have a plan at all...
As we don't have... Well, they may not have said that, but they might have said, but as... We agree with the British public that there needs to be a deterrent, stop people dying in the Channel. We will give it a go. Let's just try. But they didn't. They played politics with it, and they said, oh, we would never do anything as awful as that. And so, consequently, they are still coming over in their thousands, and they are still dying in the Channel. So, well done.
More than 5. It'll be 6,000 since Labour came
into
power.
Well, like we were saying earlier, more than 21,000 so far this year, and we're in September. So the chances are that is going to exceed the 29,000 from last year.
It's a small town, isn't it?
It is a small town.
Every year, a small town is coming into this country. We're full up already, in my view. There's no room at the inn. No room in our schools. We've already got this story we were talking about earlier about how 1 in 5 private schools could close, which will drive the whole exodus of kids from those private schools into our state schools. And where do they think these migrants are going to go?
I still genuinely have more of an issue with the enormous numbers of legal migration than we have in this country than, as we now call this, irregular migration.
No, yeah, that's what Labour call it. We're not falling for it.
This is irregular.
And if you're listening on the radio, by the way, we can just see these French officers ambling across the beach while the migrants are running hell for leather to get in the dinghy. And once they're in the dinghy, they don't touch them.
Just incredible pictures, really. Absolutely overloaded, these ribs. Completely.
Which is what happened yesterday.
People are jumping in at the very last minute. Clambering on the sides, in their clothes, with some of them with life jackets, some of them without. And I suppose on a nice sunny day, you can possibly see the coast in the distance. It probably doesn't feel that perilous. Well, obviously, that wasn't the case yesterday. Andy's got in touch on gbnews.com/yoursay and says, if you were a migrant and heard the UK gives migrants full board and lodging, medical health, all for free. At the same time, we're starving and freezing our own pensioners to death to make room for them.
Well said, Andy, because that's what people think. Now, moving on, campaigners and some MPs are calling for the people responsible for the Grenfell fire to be criminally prosecuted. And they will quite work out who is responsible.
Well, we should find out today, because the final report from the inquiry is to be published in less than an hour's time. This is, of course, 7 years after the disaster.
The report is examining not what happened on the night, but how the block came to be in that condition, who put the cladding on it, who knew, looking at the way the government regulated it and the local authority regulated it.
And that fire was just allowed to spread so quickly. So we're joined now by an expert on institutional failures, Professor Margaret Heffernan. Good morning, Margaret. You've written, correct me if I'm wrong, you've written at least one book on institutional failures, part of which focused on Grenfell. So in your experience, who is to blame here?
I think the sad fact here is that just about everybody is to blame. You saw in the first inquiry that very, very junior employees were making very dangerous decisions. They were afraid of arguing with their bosses. They were not well enough trained. There weren't enough. They didn't have enough information. They didn't have enough oversight. So I would say everybody, actually from some very junior people in precarious jobs right up to the owners of the companies and the members of Kensington and Chelsea Council, many, many, many of these people are to blame. The truth is that as Grenfell Tower was being built, everybody along the way knew that corners were being cut, that compromises were being made, and that these endangered lives. But they made them anyway in pursuit of their own careers or their own profit.
In your view, Professor, I mean, the loss of life, staggering, more than 70 people dying, does that require, after this inquiry is completed, does there have to be criminal prosecutions in your view?
I think it does, because I think it's well past time that people in these businesses, in any kind of business, remember that when you make decisions, in an office where you don't see the people that are going to be impacted by your decision, when you make these decisions, they have consequences, and that the decisions have a human impact. I think the building industry is, on some level, no different from the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry has to test rigorously all the drugs it puts on the markets because it recognizes these drugs can kill people. The same is true of buildings where we work, where we live, where we go for entertainment, and they should be held to no less a standard. It's high time we realize that business is not just about profits and margins and shareholders. It's also about the impact that all of the work people do has on the people who are living in these sorts of buildings, buying these kinds of products, putting these kinds of very dangerous products, quite frankly, on the market for developers to use.
Margaret, the tower was originally built in 1974, so the chances of anybody being in positions who are making those decisions now is pretty slim. But was it therefore the refurbishment that happened more recently? That was the time at which you think there could be culpability in terms of decisions made about the materials used?
There absolutely could have been, because the book I wrote about these kinds of failures is called Willful Blindness. Because one of the things I've come to understand studying these kinds of tragedies is that it's never the case that nobody knew, or that, well, there was just some abstruse piece of information somewhere people didn't have. Everybody knew. Everybody knew that corners were being cut. Everybody knew that costs were being cut. Lots of people, very junior people, felt under incredible pressure to make bad choices simply in order to keep their jobs. So this is a crime committed by thousands of people. I think what we have to do, and we almost never do this, is make sure that the people in charge of these decisions and in charge of these companies are held responsible for the culture that they set, for the standards that they set, for the training that they do, or indeed don't provide.
What are the barriers to that sort of accountability, Margaret? There's a very good book that I've read recently called The Accountability Deficit, and it's defining the age that defines this age that we're living in, that nobody is held responsible. Why? What's changed?
Well, a lot of things have changed, partly in order to be super efficient. We've moved to a lot of business models where lots and lots and lots of pieces of any project are outsourced to lots and lots of different companies. And the belief is that if all these companies have to compete with each other, then somehow they'll do a better job in order to get the job. So this massive amount of outsourcing to cut costs has also meant that there's been a massive amount of outsourcing of responsibility. And I think increasingly, and we hope this will be true with the new building standards, it needs to be very clear where the lines of responsibility are. Because actually, if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible.
Yeah,
which is exactly what Alexis J said about the Rotherham horror in terms of child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
That actually this idea of atomizing every stage of a business process and outsourcing it to somebody else it may save a ton of money, but every time you outsource something, you lose skill and you lose oversight, which means you lose control. If that is in order to pursue profits, then we have got our values badly upside down.
OK, thank you so much, Professor Margaret Heffernan there. Margaret, remind me the title of your book. I was looking for it here, but I can't see it.
It's called Willful Blindness.
Willful Blindness. OK, thank you so much.
Fascinating.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and
thematically the same.
And of course, the irony is that cladding on the Grenfell Tower is still in place on many, many more tower blocks and office blocks around the country 7 years later.
Isn't it funny? Because I am interested in this idea that nothing is ever anybody's fault.
I think the wily old fox who's chaired this inquiry, I don't think he'll pull his punches.
Do you not?
No, I'd be
Well, I hope
surprised.
not.
I'd be surprised.
That is going to be dropping live about 11 o'clock this morning. We're going to be bringing you some of that official conclusion.
He was pretty tough on his witnesses.
Yeah, good. Right, in just a minute, we're going to be joined by Stephen Pound and Mike Perry. We're going to look at all sorts of stories which, of course, are this morning. And we're going to be bringing you the latest on those Channel migrant crossings. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
It's a very difficult issue, this, right? As far as we know, the boxer with male chromosomes was born with female genitalia.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple. You know, sex in humans is binary and immutable because we are mammals. And there is a minority of people who have disorders of sexual development, and that can affect a person's reproductive organs. But these people are male or female. And yesterday, what we witnessed was basically just glorified male violence against women and girls. The difference is, I mean, that happens every day all over the world. And the difference is that in every other circumstance, we consider beating up women to be wrong, but it was deemed acceptable by those at the IOC because they're claiming that it's sport. But it's not. It's violence and it's wrong.
Peter, Lottie's right, isn't she, that we've been talking a lot recently about violence against women and girls, and regardless of whether this person is intersex or transgender, they have male chromosomes. That means they have a very, very distinct biological advantage that could actually be fatal to a female athlete competing against them.
Well, of course, sport does need to be fair, and we do need to examine this case very thoroughly. There are reports that the boxer, Iman Khalif, was born a biological woman. She is not transgender. She is not non-binary. She is not intersex. She may have elevated levels of testosterone, but that's entirely natural. It's beyond her control. It's the way she was born. And that is why the International Olympic Committee has said that she falls within the rules.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning, it's 10:22. This is Britain's Newsroom, and that person nattering to my left is former Labour MP Stephen Pound and broadcaster Mike Parry, being better behaved in the studio. Morning, both. Thank you. Right, where do we want to start? Do you want to talk about this awful story on the front page of the Times?
It's on all the papers.
Yeah.
I mean, take us through it.
Yeah, well, it's
constraints, obviously, what we can say.
It's so horrendous, but I've seen situations like this before. I've moved around loads of places where I've lived, you know, because I've moved around my job all my life. You always come across a situation where an old person is frightened to leave their house because feral children can allegedly get fun out of taunting old people, particularly if they think you weren't born in this country. The gentleman we're talking about here came here 40 years ago. He's 80 years of age. Came from India. Came from India, absolutely right. But we've all seen it, and once again, I have to say, I blame the parents for allowing their children to take on those sort of attitudes and to go out and find fun in taunting, allegedly bullying old people.
I was taught by my parents to respect old people.
Absolutely.
Older people. Yeah. You would get up on the bus and give them a space on the bus.
Not anymore.
You would hold a door open for them. You'd help them in a shop. Yeah. You would and it's gone.
Yes.
What's terrifying is that in Bim Kohli's community, he comes from Punjab, there is respect for the older people. But
of course.
I think obviously the first thing we say is huge commiserations to the family and his daughter. But Bim Kohli was a man who actually built up a business in Leicester, built up a business in hosiery, and then he retired, and he runs 3 a lot allotments. He was a man who's a very, very decent, hard-working man. And what worries me about this is not just the substantive point that you've quite rightly raised, but the fact that he reported this to the police on 3 occasions.
Absolutely.
The last time, they were jumping up and down on the roof of the bungalow opposite his house. Now, that is a red flag. Surely. And this particular part of Leicester, Braunston, is a very quiet, very nice place, but it's one of the sort of the new build areas.
He lives in a nice little neat cul-de-sac.
Well, where he was in Franklin Park, it's actually a model park. It's a beautiful park. And surely the police could have responded to that. If you've got this, as Mike says, a feral group of very, very young people.
They've reported themselves to the independent complaint.
They
clearly know they didn't take it seriously enough.
Absolutely. Are we the only country in the world that doesn't have this respect for older people? If you go to Italy, the families all live together.
They do.
People who've come to this country from other countries, they all tend to live in the same house.
I think he lived with his daughter because his daughter heard the commotion, went outside and found her old dad.
They shared an
injured under a tree.
They had 3 allotments. And the fact, and it was a fact, it wasn't just him. It was the whole family were working there and sharing the produce with the local people.
That's right.
What a sweet man, God rest his soul.
A very sweet man. Another thing that brought a bit of a tear to my eye was, at the time, he was walking his 15-year-old dog. So his old dog was almost as old in doggy terms as the old man, and they must have had a terrific bond between themselves, and to think one of his pleasures in life was to walk down that little, pathway into the field and see the green field and all that was disturbed, and his life in his dotage in his later years was being ruined by fear of being bullied and attacked.
But here's the thing, children don't have any fear of adults anymore. Like, bring back shame. I've said it before, but parents will defend their children to other parents. Like, if your child misbehaved, and when we were all growing up, I put myself in the same category. When we were growing up, if we misbehaved, our parents would have been embarrassed by our behaviour.
They would.
And they wouldn't have automatically assumed
I was
we
too
were
scared of my parents to behave badly.
Exactly, as was I.
And my teachers
But what
as
happens
well.
now? What happens now if a child misbehaves and a teacher says to the parents, little Oliver has misbehaved. They say, no, he hasn't. My child's perfect.
That's right.
And so there's this really strange inversion of adults not authority.
Agree. I think one of the problems is that all the years I was a school governor, one of the problems I had was when you had to exclude people. Like one particular case, there was a girl gang who had ripped another girl's hair out from her skull. And yet, when I said, look, we're going to exclude, I told the head teacher, you're going to have to exclude them straight, they sued the school. We've now got a litigious society now where people can sue at the drop of a hat. And I won't even go into the details of what the case was. But believe you me, I was the villain for actually, as the chair of governors, saying exclude these kids because they ripped this girl's hair out.
It's really problematic.
And the other issue here, and it's twofold, this about the police, right? The police don't patrol the streets anymore. No. Right? Now, when I was a kid, you said you were frightened of your parents. I was frightened of a policeman. If I saw a policeman coming down the street, I would think, have I done anything wrong or anything like that? But so there's 2 issues here. One, the police don't patrol the streets, so there's nothing to be frightened of. But even if the police had gone, these feral children would not have been frightened of the presence of a policeman because their code of behaviour in modern society does not go to respecting law and order.
Terrible.
There's just no boundaries. And also, what can teachers do to punish kids anymore? You can't use the word punish. That's deeply unpopular in schools. You can't say punish. So they might give them a detention, and the kid won't show up for the detention. They won't confiscate the phone because the parents will say, I'm paying for that phone, you can't confiscate that phone. So you get kids who can just run wild and run riot around the streets, around the schools, around the estates, and poor guys like this end up losing their lives because nobody has the backbone to step in and pull these kids.
Is there also a community issue here? Should more neighbours have been, trying to address the situation as well?
They were probably scared of the kids. One of the neighbours that called the police.
But they were probably scared of the.
But it was too late then, Stephen. It was too late then. What I'm saying is, one of the neighbours should have taken the initiative a lot sooner. And because they were worried about the old man being frightened. And therefore, I certainly would have stepped out into the street if I saw the kids and say, hey, go and pick on somebody your own size.
Don't forget, last time that happened, this chap got beaten to the man who did the complaint.
You're right.
And his wife is now in the House of Lords.
You're right.
Because she's a great campaigner.
Baroness Newlove.
Indeed, God, is there nothing you don't know?
No, that was in Manchester, wasn't it? Somewhere in the north.
So they were smashing up a car. And
he went out and remonstrated with them, and they killed
outside the house.
It didn't just destroy his family, it destroyed them family, because these children, they've not just killed a person, they've killed themselves. They've killed their future, they've killed killed their hopes. They're going to be in prison till their 30s or their 40s.
Yes.
And it's going to be like the Bulger case all over. Well, hope to God it isn't.
And then in the meantime, you've got campaign groups saying you're not allowed to smack your own child if they are misbehaved.
Right. Exactly.
Think, well, then what?
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe a subject for another day, possibly.
Absolutely. Can we talk about Miliband's wind farms?
Yeah.
Every time Ed Miliband opens his mouth, I feel terrified about what he's going to tell us we're going to do in terms of trying to get green fuel, Stephen.
And how much he's going to cost us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hang on a second. Can we just agree on one thing? We should not be enthralled to the sheikhs of Abu Dhabi for our energy for the future. We have to have some sort of renewable energy for the future.
Why don't we do fracking?
Okay.
Then we'd have loads of energy. Loads.
This is.
Why don't we carry on using our North Sea oil? They've cancelled. Your lot have cancelled all the licences.
They've not cancelled any licences.
Cancelling new licences.
Yeah, none of the existing licenses have been cancelled.
Yeah, but there'll be no more exploration.
But Andrew, can I just say one thing?
I'm answering your question. Yeah, and we don't have to rely on people like Putin.
No. If we had fracking, and I personally think it's a good and sensible idea, and if we had North Sea oil extraction, by all means, but they are finite. They're not infinite. Wind and wave power is infinite. It never, ever ends. We've got to stop thinking about today, and we've got to start thinking about tomorrow
But you
and the
can't do
day
it
after.
so suddenly, Stephen. You can't do it so suddenly. You can't say, right, stop. And by the way, Andrew's right, because you might say they're not cancelling the licences, but if you look at the financial reports, companies are now pulling out of the North Sea because there's already a rumour that a 78% windfall tax is going to be increased even higher. So, of course,
don't forget, that's when you had the energy companies saying we've got more money than we know what to do with. I mean, they've been swimming in cash. Look, the problem is, at the moment, we're looking at this as a cliff edge. We're saying we're going to stop working on fossil fuels, but we're not planning for new jobs for the future. We're not planning on replacement. We've got to actually transition from fossil fuels to renewables and keep people in. Why aren't we building wind farms in this country instead of importing them? We're importing them from South Korea and Sweden.
Yeah, but the wind farms are going to cost every household, according to this report, £150 a year, on top of all the other stuff.
Andrew, we're not building. We're paying South Korea for those turbines.
Well, why don't we build? Well, that's up to your lot. You're in power
now. We've only been in power for 3 weeks.
Yeah, but hang on. A couple of months before the election, Ed Miliband, talks like this. I'm sorry, I'm not mocking him, but he was.
Take that bacon sandwich out of your mouth.
He was telling us that. You would save £300 a year by the end of the first Labour government in heating costs. We're now being told, quite apart from saving 300, you're going to pay an extra 150, and if you're a pensioner, put another 300 on top of that, and put another 180 on top of it because of the price cap.
I know.
So you're talking about 700 or 800 quid.
Energy's going to be a lot more expensive under your lot, mate.
Yeah. Well, no, hang on a second. The energy price cap will actually give a benefit already to people. And GB Energy...
It's been raised. It's an extra 140
Andrew,
quid.
Look, at the moment, why on earth are we paying France and Germany, Électricité de France, our biggest electrical supplier? As far as I'm concerned, it should be British power for the British people, and that is what GB Energy is going to...
Which is going to cost $8 billion to set up.
Yeah.
Well, OK, let's think about tomorrow and the future.
But GB Energy is one of the reasons for the black hole, the alleged black hole, $8 billion.
The future right now is you two have got to shush.
Sam Francis.
We've got to go to the news. We're going to be talking in just a moment about Angela Rayner preparing to rip at Margaret Thatcher's right to buy policy. We might discuss that with these two as well in the next half. But first of all, here's Sam with your news.
Very good morning to you from the newsroom, 10:33 exactly, and we'll start with news from France this morning that French police have stormed a beach as around 200 migrants were seen scrambling to get their boats into the water and cross the English Channel. Dramatic footage also showed people wading out into the water, many of whom weren't wearing life jackets, before pushing away from the shore. It comes just hours after 12 people died attempting to make that crossing, including a pregnant woman and 6 children, after the bottom of their boat ripped open yesterday. That disaster adds to a growing death toll, with 226 people, including 35 children, thought to be missing or dead after attempting the journey across the Channel this year alone. A long-awaited report on the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people, is set to be published today after 7 years. The final report will focus on the roles of corporate firms, the local authority and the London Fire Brigade, amid calls for it to prompt significant change. Bereaved families have described the delay in justice as unbearable, with the police inquiry not expected to finish until 2025. 4 of the 5 children arrested over the murder of 8-year-old Bim Coley have been released without charge. Coley was attacked while walking his dog in Franklin Park near Leicester on Sunday and sadly later died in hospital. A 14-year-old boy remains in police custody as their investigations continue. The group, aged between 12 and 14, were initially arrested on suspicion of murder after a post-mortem revealed the victim died from a neck injury. Conservative MPs will kick off the first round of voting later today to choose a successor to Rishi Sunak. The initial ballot set for this afternoon will begin narrowing the field of 6 candidates with further rounds throughout September. The contenders include James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Priti Patel, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride and Kemi Badenoch. And an exam board is warning that GCSE students are taking too many exams, spending more than 30 hours in tests. That's among the highest globally. OCR, one of the main exam boards, is calling for a reduction in the number and intensity of exams. They're proposing a shift towards a more balanced and relevant curriculum. While that report is backed by education figures and comes as the government is launching its own review into curriculum and assessment. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, do stay with us for that Grenfell Tower report at 11 o'clock. We'll bring that to you live. I'll be back shortly.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News financial report.
And let's take a look at the markets for you this morning. The pound will buy you $1.3123 and €1.1872. The price of gold this hour, £1,886 and 28 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,227 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News financial report.
Still to come, it's biscuit time here. You know, we always say...
Caught in the act.
He's already eating
She's
it.
caught in the act.
It's biscuit time, so get a brew and a biscuit. Don't go anywhere, lots to come between now and midday, including, as Sam just said then, the findings of the Grenfell inquiry after 7 years. Do not go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Morning. Time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Another day you'll need the umbrella handy. It is a day of dodging the downpours. There will be some sunshine around, but most areas will see a few showers as well. Some heavy ones already across parts of northern England and southern Scotland, and we'll see more developing through the day. But it's not raining everywhere. Northwest Scotland, for example, largely fine here, much brighter day compared to yesterday. But we'll see the showers just brewing up more widely, certainly by this afternoon. Some heavy ones likely over eastern England, more scattered over Wales and southwest England, where again there'll be a bit of sunshine, lifting the temperatures only into the mid-teens across the north, maybe 20 or 21 further south. Still a few of those heavy downpours around as we go into the evening rush hour. So again, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. As I mentioned though, northwest Scotland's largely staying dry and fine. It's going to get warmer here over the next few days. A bit late, but finally some signs of summer in the far northwest. Elsewhere, well, you will have to watch out for the heavy showers developing. They're going to be hit and miss, but parts of the M1, the M25 in particular, seeing a lot of spray and surface water for this evening. As we go through the night, if anything, the rain's going to pep up across the south. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. That rain could cause some problems as it continues through the night and into the early part of tomorrow. Further north, the showers should tend to fade and most places will become dry. Again, temperatures well down into single figures on the west coast of Scotland, but further south, actually, still quite warm, double digits, staying in the teens across the southeast. But potentially tomorrow, more heavy rain to come across parts of South Wales, southern parts of the Midlands, and especially southern England. Heavy downpours, possibility of the odd rumble of thunder as well. So again, likely to cause some issues, certainly on the roads, and potentially could cause some flooding by the end of the day in some locations. Further north, many places will actually be dry and fine, and temperatures again high teens for most of us.
The latest GB News travel. Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. The M8 in Edinburgh is partly blocked eastbound by a breakdown at the A720 junction at Hermiston Gate, causing queues. In Dumfries and Galloway, the A75 is closed west of Girthon after an accident with queues towards there. On Merseyside, the A567 is closed each way along Stanley Road in Bootle because of a spillage. On the M6 in Staffordshire, 2 out of 4 lanes are closed southbound, where a lorry's broken down between junctions 13 and 12 from Stafford South to the A5, causing queues. In Powys, the A489 is closed at Kerry for an investigation, with queues towards there. In Essex, the A130 is closed southbound from the Bonvilles roundabout to the A13 Sadler's Farm roundabout at North Benfleet after an accident. There are long delays towards there and as you divert. And train services are suspended between Taunton and Bristol Temple Meads, Bridgewater and Castle Carey because of an incident.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GBNews. You're on the telly. He's doing a supermarket.
No, I was Googling Angela Rayner.
Yeah. Now, Angela Rayner is considering abolishing the right to buy scheme that was brought in by Margaret Thatcher.
She, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister, benefited from the scheme some years ago, making around £50,000 when she sold her council house under the right to buy.
So research shows that more than 4 in 10 council homes sold under the right to buy scheme are now owned by private landlords. Well, we're joined in the studio by political commentator Matthew Stadlen. Matt, I have no problem with Angela Rayner having profited from this system. She did nothing illegal. What was offered to her at the time. But obviously it looks a little like pulling the drawbridge up behind you if you've benefited in terms of social mobility. How can she justify changing this policy?
Because there is a chronic and serious shortage in social housing. And do we really want to live in a country where government policy and what is right for the country and for the citizens of this country is determined by what a government minister did or didn't benefit from 10 years ago?
But it was one of the great parts of social mobility, wasn't it, in the 80s, 90s, the Thatcher right to buy. And so my parents had the opportunity, they chose not to take it. Much to my disapproval, it has to be said.
Was that out of principle or because they couldn't afford it at the time? What was
they wouldn't have been able to afford it initially, but later on they could have. But Mum just took the old-fashioned view, it's a council house and the council will fix the roof if it needs fixing. But it did enable people then to move on, buy their own home. And my criticism always of the right to buy was that the receipts from the sale should have been ploughed back into more council housing. Instead, it disappeared into a black hole called the Treasury.
So I absolutely understand why people who benefited from right to buy wanted to buy their own homes. Because who wouldn't? I mean, I understand that your parents decided not to, but you're totally entitled to want to do that. It's a very natural human instinct to own the roof over your own head. So I don't begrudge anyone who has taken that choice. I mean, there has been, I think, some abuse of the system. You know, you get council houses that end up being put up for rent on the private sector and so forth. But in essence, the principle of it, of course, I can understand the persuasiveness of it. The problem is the consequences, and no doubt unintended consequences. I don't think Thatcher wanted to create an underclass, but that is arguably what she did. So you had some people benefiting, as I say, completely natural to want to do that, but then that created or helped to create a massive shortage in social housing. And we are in a real crisis in this country. One of the ways to tackle that crisis, obviously, is to build more houses and to tackle NIMBYism, and that's what the government and Angela Rayner say they are absolutely determined to do. But it also seems sensible to cut back on the right to buy if it's going to help the greater good.
But if they said from right to buy, all the receipts from right to buy go into a council house fund, that would fund more council housing, Matt.
It takes time, of course.
It would be quicker.
But it takes time to build houses. So you've got to build houses, but at the same time, you don't want your existing stock to be downgraded or degraded.
Well, let's think about it. Margaret Thatcher initiated this policy because she thought the state should not be there to give you a house. partly. She wanted to lose that culture that the state will provide you with a roof over your head. So she sold them off, effectively. And subsequent governments, every government subsequently, Labour and Conservative, have not built enough social housing. They never replaced them. So where we are in 2024 with Angela Rayner saying we're going to build more council houses and we're not going to let you buy them, what she's saying is in the future the state will look after you. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that change of ideology.
Well, we don't want people on our streets, do we? So people need...
I quite like them working really, really hard.
Yeah,
and being able to buy affordable housing.
Yeah, but the suggestion that people who live in social housing don't work really, really hard will offend a lot of people who live in social housing. So I don't think this is about ideology from Angela Rayner. This is about the practical and desperate need that there is in this country for social housing. Listen, I am really in favour, surprise, surprise, of social mobility. You know, if you think back to the grammar schools, which have, you know, many of them have gone over the years.
Sadly.
That they were a really important lever for people to move up, as it were, through society. I understand the arguments that the right to buy also helped. The problem is who gets left behind.
Just very briefly, because I'm on pressure of time. What will this say about Labour, this Labour government? People say they're not really in favour of the working classes. This is a kick in the working classes. It's a kick in their aspirations.
Not if you're struggling to get a roof over your head, not if there aren't enough social houses for you to actually have a home. No. This is absolutely not an attack on the working classes. This is facing up to the reality that there is a massive shortage. And who loses out from that shortage? The working classes.
OK, thank you, Matt. Controversial, let us know your thoughts, gbnews.com/your say. I'm next, we're going to be talking to Dame Esther Ranson's daughter about her mother's desperate plea to MPs in relation to assisted dying. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yeah. If I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about
You'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10:49. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
So tomorrow MPs get the chance to introduce new bills. They're called private members' bills. They have a ballot and an MP can then bring forward legislation. Normally doesn't have much chance of getting through, but just occasionally it does.
So one possible bill that's been spoken about for a while is on assisted dying, and Dame Esther Ranson has issued a heartfelt plea for MPs to allow a vote on the issue so that the law can be changed.
Well, let's talk now to the TV presenter and daughter of Dame Esther Ranson, who is, of course, Rebecca Wilcox. Rebecca, morning to you. We've all been very moved, Rebecca, by your mum's statements on assisted dying and her own battle against cancer. She's a very, very persuasive advocate of a law change. We've got a new government now, but are you confident perhaps there may be progress in this area?
Well, thank you for having me and saying such lovely things about Mum. She is indomitable. In fact, people refer to being Estered as a verb because she manages to persuade them to do whatever it is that she is asking them to do. Quite often it is to join a very worthwhile campaign. And in the past, it has been for other people. It has been for vulnerable children and vulnerable adults through Childline and Silverline. But now, this one is really personal. This one is about her very imminent future. This one is about her access to choice, which is not something I ever thought that my mum, who has always been a fantastic decision maker, has always been hugely independent, has always been very forthright. It's not something I ever thought she would have to struggle with, but she is curtailed by the boundaries of the law. Sir Keir Starmer, before he became Prime Minister, promised that there would be a free vote, promised that he would give it his backing. It feels like it's stalled. It feels like a lot is going on, obviously. I think this is not an easy time for anybody. I'm sure he's organised his tickets to Oasis. I would like him now to organise an assisted dying bill.
What will you do if he doesn't, Rebecca?
I will go and sit on the doorstep of 10 Downing Street. I hear they have a cat. I like them. I'll just stroke the cat while I wait and wait for him to agree to it. Because, frankly, time is running out. Time is running out for so many families. This is not just my mother's campaign. Obviously, it's personal to us because of my mother's involvement and because of what she's going through with her stage 4 terminal cancer. But so many families are facing exactly the same situation. This anvil of horror hanging over their heads, which is the future. And it's not knowing whether you're going to have the death that you want, the death that is kind, the death that is referred to as good in the report that came out earlier this year, or you're going to have one of those awful, painful deaths that destroys every memory that your family has of you. My father's death wasn't as terrible as it could have been, but I still remember moment by moment, second by second, his death in hospital way more than I remember our last conversation, our last hug, our last cup of tea together. I remember the drips, the beeps, the pain, the anguish, the nurses, the conversations carried on outside the curtains. And if Mum is having pain, Mum is writhing in agony, and I know that you probably can't imagine that. I can't imagine her like that. She is voracious and awesome and incredible, and she is not somebody that should be withering in a deathbed, writhing in pain. So I will fight.
So I know we get very squeamish about this sort of thing, Rebecca, and particularly maybe Brits, we're a little bit buttoned up about this sort of thing. I genuinely believe you can have what would be termed a good death. I totally believe that is possible for many people. But what would that look like for your mum? What would her ideal passing look like? Would she be at home? Would she have you around her? Just help people to understand the practicalities of that.
Well, I don't want to put words into her mouth. She probably has very strong views. In fact, of course, she has very strong views on what her ideal death would be. She's horribly allergic to champagne, but I guess if this is the last drink, she could have a beautiful glass of very expensive pink champagne, a beautiful, warm, bubbly bath, put on every diamond that anybody can lend her, and then have a nice, peaceful last meal, last chat. We'll all surround her. She's got so many grandchildren. She's got all of us kids. She's got some wonderful, really close friends. She would love to say goodbye to everybody and then just gently, gently slip away. That's a good death. I mean, that's a heavenly death.
And at a time of her choosing, I think fundamentally. Yeah.
That's exactly it. It's when she wants to go. It's the choice. That's what we're asking for. We're not asking for a carte blanche to commit suicide. We're saying that if you have a terminal diagnosis of less than 6 months, to be given the choice.
OK,
All right.
Rebecca, sorry to wrap that up.
And send her our love, Rebecca. Send her our love.
We will.
Thank you. Right, still to come, we're going to be taking the Grenfell report live. See you in a minute.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Sunshine and showers for most of us today. Some of those showers could be quite heavy across northwestern areas, but in any sunshine, it will still feel fairly warm. We've got high pressure building in for northern areas as we head towards the weekend, but before then, a number of weather fronts still bringing some outbreaks of rain throughout today. So across eastern areas, it will stay quite cloudy through a lot of today. There's a risk of some quite heavy showers breaking out in the southeast later on this afternoon. But elsewhere across southern areas of Scotland, we've already had some quite heavy showers today, and we could see some further heavy downpours later on this afternoon, as well as across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. So it is a fresher day than yesterday, but there will be some sunny intervals, and the winds are quite light, so it will feel pleasant enough if you do catch any sunshine. Now, as we head into this evening, still pretty cloudy across eastern areas of Scotland. Some drizzly rain coming into parts of Aberdeenshire. Still a risk of some quite heavy showers further west, but generally that's where the best chance of any sunshine across parts of Scotland is later on today. And sunny spells across parts of Northern Ireland, as well as some heavy downpours. Now in Wales, the west coast is where we'll see the best of the sunshine. Further inland, a risk of some cloudier skies, and across the south coast as well, a mix of cloudy skies and outbreaks of rain. And it's overnight tonight across southern areas where that rain will start to turn quite heavy. There is a weather warning in force for all of Thursday. Now, the heavy rain will likely last all the way through Friday and into Saturday as well, actually. So we could see quite a lot of rain falling across southern areas. That may bring some trouble on the roads first thing on Thursday, but it's further north where things start to become more settled. So a drier night across parts of northwest Scotland, Northern Ireland, and a fine start to the day on Thursday across these areas. And there'll be plenty of sunshine too, and it'll feel fairly warm in that sunshine. Highs of around 21 or 22 degrees across western Scotland, northwestern England. Further south, though, much fresher and damper day.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is your chance.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan Tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Morning, 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 4th of September, live across the UK. This is Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So the final report in the Grenfell inquiry is coming out any minute now.
So we will cross live to the inquiry for that report by Sir Martin, what's his name?
Sir Martin Moore-Bick is...
He's a retired Lord Chief Justice. He's been in the hot seat for 7 years.
That's right. Of course, just to remind you, the disaster claimed the lives of 72 people. It was June 2017. It's just astonishing that these inquiries take so long. How can it have taken 7 years, Andrew?
And it was about a week after the general election. And do you remember Theresa May went up to Grenfell Tower, talked to the police and talked to emergency services, but didn't talk to a single family?
Oh.
Do you remember?
I did. I'd forgotten that. The hearings concluded in November 2022. An update from the inquiry in April this year stated that the report would not be published before the next anniversary of the tragedy.
We can go there live now because Sir Martin is about to speak.
Is publishing its final report dealing with the root causes of the fire. In phase 1 of the investigations, I examined the events of the 14th of June 2017, how the fire started, how it escaped from the flat where it had begun, and how it spread over the whole building with tragic consequences. My report on that series of events was published on the 30th of October 2019. In the second phase of the inquiry, the panel has been investigating the underlying causes of the fire with a view to identifying where mistakes were made and ensuring that a similar disaster cannot occur again. This second part of the investigations has taken longer than we had hoped, partly because of the broad scope of our terms of reference, and partly because, as our investigations progressed, we uncovered many more matters of concern than we had originally expected. As we discovered, it is not possible properly to understand the causes of the fire without understanding the way in which knowledge of the materials and methods of construction employed in the refurbishment developed over the course of time, what the government and others learnt about them, and how the regulations and guidance relating to their use developed during the same period. The information obtained in that part of our investigations provided the background to our examination of the refurbishment itself and the various decisions taken in the course of it, particularly in relation to the selection of materials. In addition, it has been necessary for us to examine the way in which fire safety at Grenfell Tower was managed, including the arrangements for fire risk assessments and the response to them, as well as the relationship between the tenant management organisation and the residents of the tower. The firefighting operations of the London Fire Brigade were considered in detail in my first report, but a number of questions relating to organisation and training could not be answered at that stage and were deferred for consideration in Phase 2. Also deferred to Phase 2 were certain questions relating to the development of the fire, including the relative contributions of the different materials used in the cladding. Another important aspect of our terms of reference was to investigate the response of the authorities to the emergency. Finally, but most importantly, it was necessary for us to investigate in as much detail as the evidence would allow the circumstances surrounding the deaths of those who perished in the fire. The report we're publishing today contains our findings on all these and other matters. However, the simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants. They include the government, the tenant management organisation, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, those who manufactured and supplied the materials used in the refurbishment, those who certified their suitability for use on high-rise buildings, the architect, the principal contractor, and some of its subcontractors, in particularly Harley Curtain Wall and its successor Harley Facades, some of the consultants, in particular the fire engineer Exover Warrington Fire, the local authority's building control department, and the London Fire Brigade. Not all of them bear the same degree of responsibility for the eventual disaster, but as our reports show, all contributed to it in one way or another, in most cases through incompetence, but in some cases through dishonesty and greed. The failings can be traced back over many years, and our efforts to get to the bottom of what went wrong and why account for the length of our report and the time it has taken us to produce it. However, if an inquiry of this kind is to produce anything of value, it is necessary for those who can influence the future direction of the construction industry, the fire and rescue services, the management of fire safety in buildings, and resilience planning, to understand exactly where mistakes were made and how they can be avoided in the future. The report is divided into 14 parts, broadly by reference to related subjects. Some parts contain several chapters, some only one. As with the Phase 1 report, it begins with an introduction followed by an executive summary. Although the executive summary runs to 24 pages, the length of the report means that it can touch on only the most significant elements of our conclusions. However, it should assist readers in finding their way around the report. Part 2 describes significant events that provided the background to the fire. It begins by explaining how the regulations and guidance in force at the time of the refurbishment came into being, and the way in which the reaction to fire of materials used in the construction of modern high-rise buildings was tested. We then consider the involvement of the government in the form of the then Department for Communities and Local Government, the way in which it sought to monitor the causes of fires when they occurred, and most importantly, the warning signs that were emerging from as early as 1991 that some kinds of materials, in particular aluminium composite material panels with unmodified polyethylene cores, were dangerous. We find that there was a failure on the part of the government and others to give proper consideration at an early stage to the dangers of using combustible materials in the walls of high-rise buildings. That including failing to amend in an appropriate way the statutory guidance on the construction of external walls. That is where the seeds of the disaster were sown. In Part 3, we set out our findings about the testing and marketing of the main products used in the refurbishment: the Rainabond panels, the Celotex RS5000 insulation, and the small amount of Kingspan K15 insulation. We discovered that there had been systematic dishonesty on the part of manufacturers involving deliberate manipulation of the testing processes and calculated attempts to mislead purchasers into thinking that what were combustible materials complied with the provisions of the statutory guidance that advised against their use. That dishonest approach to marketing was compounded by the failure of two of the bodies that provided certificates of compliance with the building regulations and statutory guidance, the British Board of Agreement and Local Authority Building Control, to scrutinise the information provided to them with sufficient care and exercise the degree of rigour and independence that was to be expected of them. The tenant management organisation was at the heart of events leading up to the fire. In part 4 of the report, we make our findings about its relationship with the residents of Grenfell Tower. We find that the organisation was badly run and failed to respond to criticisms of its treatment of residents contained in independent reports produced in 2009. It is clear that for some years before the fire, relations between the TMO and residents were marked by distrust, antagonism, and increasingly bitter confrontation. We find that for the TMO to have allowed the relationship to deteriorate to such an extent reflects a serious failure on its part to observe its basic responsibilities. Part 5 of the report is concerned with the management of fire safety at the tower. Again, we find that the residents were badly let down. The picture is one of a persistent failure to give sufficient importance to the demands of fire safety, particularly the safety of vulnerable people, and a failure on the part of the Council to scrutinise that aspect of the organisation's activities adequately. Part of the reason for that was the failure of the Chief Executive, Robert Black, to ensure that the board of the TMO and the Council were kept properly informed of matters affecting fire safety. That was despite periodic expressions of concern by the London Fire Brigade about compliance with the fire safety order, all of which should have been drawn to their attention. The TMO's failure to attach sufficient importance to fire safety is illustrated by its reliance on a single person, Carl Stokes, as fire risk assessor for its entire estate, despite his lack of qualifications and experience, by its failure to carry out necessary remedial work identified in fire risk assessments promptly, by its failure to provide measures to mitigate the absence of an effective smoke ventilation system, and by its failure to introduce appropriate arrangements for inspecting and maintaining fire prevention systems, in particular self-closing devices on the entrance doors to individual flats. In addition, the TMO failed to maintain a reasonably accurate record of those residents of the tower who were vulnerable for one reason or another and likely to need help to escape if a fire occurred. Part 6 of the report contains our findings about the refurbishment itself, and again the picture is disturbing. First, the regulatory context in which the work was carried out was, in our view, unsatisfactory because the statutory guidance, which was treated by many in the construction industry, including those engaged on the refurbishment, as containing a sufficient statement of what was required, did not make it clear enough that it was subject to the overriding requirements of the building regulations. That was a particular problem in relation to the rain screen panels, which, although they satisfied the requirement in the guidance for a material with a Class 0 surface, contained a highly combustible core. But that is only the beginning. The tenant management organisation, as the client, manipulated the process of appointing an architect to design the refurbishment in order to avoid the need to invite open tenders for the architectural services. It did so because it wanted to appoint Studio E, the architect for the existing Academy and Leisure Centre project, despite the fact that it had no experience of overcladding a high-rise building. That turned out to have significant consequences because Studio E failed to recognise, as a reasonably competent architect should have done, that the insulation and rain screen chosen for the refurbishment were combustible and unsuitable for that purpose. ACM panels were chosen as the rain screen to keep down the cost. Neither Ryden, the principal contractor, nor Harley, its cladding subcontractor, was aware.
So that's the Martin Moore-Bick. I think his report is 1,700 pages. So we're not going to stay for the entire duration as he goes through it. But we'd like to stay with us in the studio is Sir Jake Berry, who was a minister in the Department of Communities and Local Government. It was your department, Jake, that this fell under. So the day, when you wake up in the morning, what was the atmosphere like in your department?
So it was very close to the general election, if you recall. Immediately following the general election, Theresa May appointed me as a minister in this department. It was my second day into the department. I went in, there was an unbelievable feeling of shock and grief and trauma about this appalling tragedy that had taken place. And for all of the ministerial team who got together with the then Permanent Secretary, who's Melanie Dawes, now at Ofcom, we immediately realised that this was probably the biggest thing we were ever going to deal with in our lives, and certainly the biggest thing that the Department for Communities and Local Government had ever dealt with. It was an appalling loss of life. Our first sort of reaction was to ensure that the families who were so terribly affected, those who'd survived and those who'd died, relatives of those who died were supported properly. The second thing we then had to do is, in very short order, try and understand how extensive this problem was with this flammable cladding, and we now learn in this report today that it's extremely extensive. And then also there was an entire process of trying to understand how we could set up this inquiry. This has taken 7 years to report. Our initial ambition was to do it much more quickly, but it's such a complicated inquiry. Well, I think it's such a complicated inquiry. There was former secretaries of state like Eric Pickles, Labour secretaries of state who had to give evidence. They all had to be given access to their old papers in the department to understand what role they may or may not have had in terms of rolling out this cladding on social housing. And I think the real question that I've got, and I'm really glad that this report has come out today, it's very critical of government, quite correctly, of all political stripes since the 1990s. It's actually quite critical of the London Fire Brigade, who it says didn't have a plan to deal with this sort of emergency in a building. But its worst sort of anger and criticism is directed at the companies that provided this cladding and installed it. It goes as far as saying that they have purposely misled
because they knew it was
on the safety tests. And the real question, I mean, I'm going to read the report in detail. It's obviously just come out now. I've played quite a big part of working in that department. I'm really interested to see what it said. But I think it asks much broader questions about our society. This isn't the only scandal where we are sat on television programmes talking about the appalling impact. We've, of course, had the infected blood scandal that took decades incorrectly.
And another failure of government.
Another failure of government, the post office scandal.
Another failure of government.
Another failure of government, and now this. And I'm just interested to know who is going to pick up the potentially multi-billion-pound cost of sorting out this cladding. I'm guessing it's going to be the taxpayer. What action is the government going to take against these cladding companies who, according to this report, purposely misled the government and in this case, Kensington and Chelsea Council? But it is just very, very depressing that we've waited 7 years for another report, which really tells us what I knew on the first day when I walked into the department.
At the time as well, some people in the Labour Party were trying to depict this as wicked Kensington and Chelsea Tory council, neglecting poor people in the poorest part of the borough, sticking this cladding on, knowing it was serious. That was a terrible misrepresentation of what happened.
Well, it was. I think... Technically, I think it was actually a Labour government that stipulated that the cladding should be put on the buildings in the first place, and that's why this report identifies multiple failures of multiple governments across decades. But I don't think the families and the supporters and the friends of those affected by this appalling Grenfell tragedy want us politicians or people involved in this today to start pointing the finger in terms of politics. I think they want us to come out and acknowledge the mistakes we've made, but also have that wider call about how do these public scandals continually happen. We've named but three on this, but we could go on. How do they keep happening? And why is it always the taxpayer and ultimately the British public that bears the price?
As you say, Jake, this report has pretty much just been revealed. Systemic dishonesty by the manufacturers of the cladding and insulation is one of the conclusions. The US firm Arconic, which manufactured the Rayno Bond 55 cladding, which experts inquiry said was by far the largest contributor to the fire, and the company's deliberately concealed the true extent of the danger using its products. Like, that doesn't hold any punches, does it?
No. I mean, it's excoriating when it comes to these manufacturers.
He hasn't pulled his punches.
But what this report doesn't address, of course, there are still hundreds of people going to sleep every single night in buildings with this on.
We've got to take a quick break. One of the other conclusions, how building safety is managed in England and Wales is, quote, seriously defective. So another big issue on the desk of Sir Keir Starmer.
Jake's staying with us. Stay with us. We'll be bringing the latest on the Grenfell Tower report in a moment.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Luis Elizondo says that he worked at the Pentagon and that he knows that they have recovered material that is not from this Earth. He resigned after believing his government wasn't taking the threat of UFOs seriously. So have they been covering up alien material from us?
I don't think the claims that are being made in Luis Elizondo's book, Imminent, are new. But I think what we have to pay attention to is the seniority of, one, Luis Elizondo, and two, the people who recruited him, and indeed the people he worked for, which was the Department of Defence and the Pentagon.
You think that he was in a position to know about this?
Yeah, he would have been. He would have been speaking to the individuals who were taking part in these investigations. You're showing some of those clips just now that potential incursions by objects controlled by a non-human intelligence, potentially. We're not saying alien necessarily, but something non-human.
Seems a bit far-fetched to me, Andrew. I'm a sceptic.
When people say sceptical, I think as a species, we're relatively new in terms of what we do in space. But right now, we've got a robot on Mars that drives about and has a little helicopter drone that every so often comes up, flies about away 10 feet from it to collect samples and comes back. Now, a species a couple of hundred years down the line from us would have far better technology than that. So who's to say what we're encountering aren't just really advanced probes from something else that's just slightly ahead of us in the technological scale? I don't think that's too far stretch of the imagination.
When you do see things like what we just saw there, which was made public, the New York Times did a big expose on all of this, and actually, you know, the world didn't end. We weren't all outside fighting each other for scraps of food and burning down the nearest Lidl, were we? We just thought, oh, that's quite cool.
I think now we have to look at it and maybe take a step back, look at the people coming out now, talking about UFOs and thinking, is there something to this that we've maybe been overlooking?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 11:23. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
We've been hearing about the Grenfell Tower report. We're now joined by our GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's been there. Catherine, this is a mammoth, epic publication. Tell us what we've learnt so far, Catherine.
Yes, good morning to both of you. I've spent the last 3 hours reading some of the over 1,600 pages of this utterly damning report, which has taken over 7 years to produce, and 72 people lost their lives in that fire just a couple of miles from here in West London. And the headlines: decades of failure by central government and other bodies in positions of responsibility in the construction industry. Now, as the inquiry chairman, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, just said, the all avoidable, and that those who lived in the tower were badly failed by government, manufacturers, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, the London Fire Brigade, and the list, frankly, goes on and on. He says that they were failed mostly through incompetence, but in some cases by dishonesty and greed. Now, frankly, there is a huge amount of blame being spread around. Now, some of it rests with the government. They say that from 1991, this Knowsley House fire, the risks of using cladding in high-rise buildings was well known. And that by 2016, the Department of Communities and Local Government knew of these risks, talks about the government's deregulatory agenda and how that extended basically to fire safety too, but a failure of multiple bodies. The regulators who were supposed to make sure that materials used in building were safe, but a huge amount of blame too with the architectural firm and the manufacturers who knew of the risks of the products in the case of the manufacturers and deliberately covered up those risks and sold them on in the interests of profit. Now, obviously, the families, this is an ongoing horror for them. Sure, they have answers, but what they want to see now is action. They want to see people going to jail, people held accountable, and change. We will be hearing from some of them in the next couple of hours. The police are investigating 19 organisations and 58 individuals. If they decide to prosecute anybody, that probably wouldn't begin until at least 2026.
That's Catherine Forster, who's at the inquiry for us. We've still got with us in the studio Sir Jake Berry, was a minister in that department. You were just telling us that. I mean, when you got to your desk in that morning, Grenfell Tower was still burning.
I mean, it was so... Look, it was a difficult day for me. I mean, it was really difficult for the people who've been affected and their families been affected by this appalling tragedy. You know... There's quite a lot of criticism of the civil service in this report and multiple failures over years, but to give them their due on that day, I also saw them at their best. These are hugely committed individuals who came into work, they were working through the night, they were trying to find solutions. But what really brought it home to me wasn't just that day, it was later on that evening. I was driving down the A40. And you could see, in fact, you can still see Grenfell Tower today clad in a memorial for the families, but you could see the building as a black, burnt-out shell, a scene of an appalling tragedy. And it just really brought home, I think, to everyone who looked at that building, the appalling scale of this tragedy and the fire.
And happening in such a rich, wealthy country.
Yeah.
As Catherine just said there, Jake, and also Mike Parry and Stephen Pound have joined us in the studio as well. As Catherine just said there will be families who want criminal prosecutions. They want to see people in jail for this. What are the chances, do you think, of that happening? And what could somebody be charged with under these circumstances?
Well, I sort of caveat say I haven't had the opportunity to read the full report. I've just seen the headlines. It does seem to me that there may well be a case made for corporate manslaughter. The inquiry says that there was deliberate concealment and falsification of the fire tests in relation to these cladding panels. if true, if proven in the court of law, it would seem to me the next reasonable step would be for us to pursue a corporate manslaughter case against the directors or other people involved in those businesses. Someone has to be held responsible for this. You know, dozens of people lost their lives. It's the biggest tragedy, biggest tragedy in housing, but almost in Britain, really, for decades. 72 people lost their lives. Someone has to be held responsible and criminally responsible
and
at that.
what should happen to the building? Because at the moment it's still, it's got the heart in it. We love Grenfell. Grenfell's always in our hearts. But what should happen to that? Should it become a museum?
Well, the plan is, and funding was made available by the government to make it into memorial gardens to commemorate the people who lost their lives. That is making slow progress, but I think quite correctly the government and the local authority want to be in close consultation with the family and the friends of people who lost their lives or people who were just affected by this and move at the pace that they feel comfortable with.
I always thought it should have been pulled down within days of the tragedy happening.
I agree.
I think in any other country they'd have said, right, we've got to be very firm about this. This stands as a disgrace to this country. Pull it down.
Although it's a crime scene.
But it's also it's not what the families wanted. And you know, this is an appalling human tragedy. Yes, there are lots of failures, but we were absolutely clear within the department that we would move at the speed at which families would wish to move. And in relation to, I understand that very strong feeling. It's not something I'd necessarily disagree with, but it's also, you know, that people's ashes are in the building, as it were.
I agree with that, but seeing that monument all the time to the terror that went on, I thought it was better to get rid of it.
Jake rightly talks about his officials. I mean, I'd just been re-elected. We had the general election the month before, and it's about 2 miles from where I live. We saw the smoke. When I went down there the next day, because we heard about it about 6 o'clock in the morning, and we immediately knew that there's something horrendous going on, and my local authority and a group of us went there. What I found was absolutely extraordinary. You credit your officials, quite rightly. I credit the local community. The local church opened up immediately. Even a local synagogue. I didn't even know there was a synagogue there. They were there, and and a local mosque, all working together. We saw the worst, but I have to say, I think we saw the best.
And also, even though they've been...
Sorry, Jake, but we are already late for the news, and Sam Francis is waiting for us. But don't go anywhere. We'll carry this on after the news. Here's Sam.
Very good morning to you from the newsroom just after 11:30. Plenty more on that detailed 1,700-page report on the Grenfell fire from that inquiry later this morning. First, though, a look at the other news leading this morning. French police have stormed a beach as around 200 migrants scrambled to get to their boats into the water as they crossed the English Channel earlier. Dramatic footage shows people wading into the water, many of them not wearing life jackets, before pushing away from the shore. It came just 12 hours after people had died attempting to make that crossing, including, sadly, a pregnant woman and 6 children after the bottom of their boat ripped open. That disaster adds to a growing death toll, with 226 people, including 35 children, now thought to be missing or dead after attempting that crossing this year alone. 4 of the 5 children arrested over the murder of 8-year-old Bim Coley have been released without charge. Coley was attacked while walking his dog in Franklin Park near Leicester on Sunday and later died in hospital. A 14-year-old boy does remain in police custody as investigations continue. Well, that group, aged between 12 and 14, were initially arrested on suspicion of murder after a post-mortem revealed the victim died from a neck injury. Police are now urging anyone with information about that attack to come forward. England's GP services face a critical tipping point, according to a new study. Researchers from the University College London found that while the NHS workforce did grow by 20% from 2015 to 2022, the number of GPs per 1,000 patients fell by 15%. GP practices also dropped by 20% over the decade, despite an 11% rise in the number of patients registering. Concerns are now growing over the increasing reliance on non-medical staff, with experts warning it could impact the quality of care, though the government has promised reforms, including hiring more GPs and raising their pay. Conservative MPs will be kicking off their first round of voting today to choose a successor to Rishi Sunak. That initial ballot, set for this afternoon, will begin narrowing the field of 6 candidates down, with further rounds throughout September. The contenders include James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Dame Priti Patel, Tom Tugendhat, Mel Stride and Kemi Badenoch. An exam board is warning today that GCSE students are taking too many exams and spending more than 30 hours in tests, among the highest globally. OCR, one of the main exam boards, is calling for a reduction in the number and intensity of those exams, proposing instead a shift towards a more balanced and relevant curriculum. The report, backed by education figures, comes as the government launches its own review into curriculum and assessment. And finally, in the sport, Dame Sarah Storey has added yet another medal to her remarkable career. She's clinched her 18th Paralympic gold in the women's C5 time trial, completing the 14.1-kilometre course in just 20 minutes and 22 seconds. The 46-year-old, who started her sporting journey in swimming, now boasts 29 Paralympic medals, solidifying her status as Team GB's most decorated Paralympian. Those are the latest headlines. For now, plenty more on that news from the Grenfell Tower inquiry throughout the rest of the day here on GB News.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Sunshine and showers for most of us today. Some of those showers could be quite heavy across northwestern areas, but in any sunshine it will still feel fairly warm. We've got high pressure building in for northern areas as we head towards the weekend, but before then a number of weather fronts still bringing some outbreaks of rain throughout today. So across eastern areas it will stay quite cloudy through a lot of today. There's a risk of some quite heavy showers breaking out in the southeast later on this afternoon, but elsewhere across southern areas of Scotland, we've already had some quite heavy showers today, and we could see some further heavy downpours later on this afternoon, as well as across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. So it is a fresher day than yesterday, but there will be some sunny intervals and the winds are quite light, so it will feel pleasant enough if you do catch any sunshine. Now, as we head into this evening, still pretty cloudy across eastern areas of Scotland, some drizzly rain coming into parts of Aberdeenshire. Still a risk of some quite heavy showers further west, but generally that's where the best chance of any sunshine across parts of Scotland is later on today, and sunny spells across parts of Northern Ireland, as well as some heavy downpours. Now in Wales, the west coast is where we'll see the best of the sunshine. Further inland, a risk of some cloudier skies, and across the south coast as well, a mix of cloudy skies and outbreaks of rain. And it's overnight tonight across southern areas where that rain will start to turn quite heavy. There is a weather warning in force for all of Thursday. Now, the heavy rain will likely last all the way through Friday and into Saturday as well, actually. So we could see quite a lot of rain falling across southern areas. That may bring some trouble on the roads first thing on Thursday, but it's further north where things start to become more settled. So a drier night across parts of northwest Scotland, Northern Ireland, and a fine start to the day on Thursday across these areas. And there'll be plenty of sunshine too, and it'll feel fairly warm in that sunshine. Highs of around 21 or 22 degrees across western Scotland, northwestern England. Further south though, much fresher and damper day.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK. From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
11:38, this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce. We still have in the studio Stephen Pound, Mike Parry, and, of course, Sir Jake Berry. Right.
We were talking about criminal culpability, but what we still know, Jake, is that this cladding is still on dozens and dozens, if not more, public buildings. It's got to come off.
So it's a mix, isn't it? So there's still night watchers being held in buildings. Could you imagine, going to bed at night with your children maybe in the next room to you and thinking, we could not wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
There could be a knock on the door if there's a fire. We could die. I mean, it's appalling. Where those buildings are publicly owned, where the housing association or belong to local authorities, actually very good progress is and has been made in relation to taking the cladding off. It's just very time-consuming. There's a lot of buildings to do, particularly high-rise buildings, local authority building. There's also a separate scandal where buildings were privately owned, built by major national developers. They, through no fault of their own, incorporated this planning because that's what they were told to do by the government's building regs. Make sure this is an energy-efficient building. And you still have thousands of people up and down this country paying a mortgage to live in an unsafe building where their flat is effectively worthless. Now, there's been quite a lot of money come forward from the government to help people, but ultimately it is the job of the developers to put this right.
I say, why is it the taxpayer footing the bill, as usual?
But it's not a very clear-cut situation. I've seen a case reported down in Portsmouth, near where I live, of a young fellow who bought his first ever flat, one-bedroom flat, bought it for about £125,000, and the bill he was given to repair the cladding issue was £120,000. The young man committed suicide because he saw absolutely no way out. And that's happening all over the country. I'm a property investor. Nearly £1 million of property was rendered worthless for the reasons you've indicated. But if you had a buy-to-let property, you couldn't even rent it out. And you will have gone around the country and seen these huge buildings with green netting all around them, That means they're replacing the cladding. But, for instance, in 2 properties I had, they had to take the balconies off because after discovering that cladding was a big problem, they found a lot of the balcony floors are made of wood. And wood on a building like that would also have been a huge fire hazard. So they took the balconies off and had to repair them and put them back.
It wasn't even external, it was actually internal wood that they put. But look, I thought Michael Gove had been pretty rational, pretty sensible about this. He'd actually said ultimately, and the principle
that he was Housing Secretary.
The polluter pays and the criminal should actually pay for it. If a company's registered in the UK, surely we have some sanction. And I'd back Michael Gove in a case like this because he was a pretty tenacious minister.
He did pursue.
Why has he not won?
Well, it's a partial victory because there are some companies that are paying to put this right, and the government has relentlessly pursued them. There are thousands of people who are held in a sort of legal limbo as an argument sometimes goes on between the building owner. Many of these buildings were sold to pension funds when the last flat has been sold, so the building owner is often a pension fund. The developer, the producer of the cladding, we hear from this report today that there was systematic dishonesty by the company in respect of Grenfell Tower that was producing this cladding. So people are caught in a sort of legal limbo. I just wanted to come back to something Stephen was saying about the community reaction, though, because I think it's really important that we give the community the credit it is due today. Now, the London Fire Brigade has been quite heavily criticised in this report, particularly about not having a plan to deal with this sort of fire. But actually, I know from my time in the department, the Fire Brigade, the ambulance service, the police, all our uniformed services, as well as the local community, were fantastic, not just on the night and into the morning of this appalling tragedy, but for weeks and months afterwards, with the London Fire Brigade doing food banks, free food for people who'd lost their home, with the community, as Stephen said, churches, mosques and synagogues coming together to support the community. So while this showed the worst of Britain and systemic failures of government and the state in general, it also showed the best of Britain in the community around Grenfell Tower.
I think that's an important point, and I remember going there 2 days afterwards. We couldn't get into the Catholic school at the base of it, so full of clothes and children's toys and things. But look, just on the point of corporate manslaughter and culpability, do you remember the asbestos scandal back in the 60s and the 70s? You know, when companies were actually putting lethal, carcinogenic asbestos in buildings. Yeah, the government pursued that and actually brought the money from the companies. And a couple of them went out of business about that. I thought, if we could do it then, why can't we do it now?
I guess some of the companies probably aren't even trading anymore.
Well, I think the company named in this report is based in the United States. I don't know the status of it, but the government. There's been a lot of state failure here, and we've got to hold our hands up. Both Steve and I are both ex-members of Parliament and in government ourselves. There's been a lot of state failure here, which we have to hold our hands up to, but also we have to relentlessly pursue these companies. And for the families affected by this appalling tragedy, quite correctly, as your reporter reporting live has pointed out, they want to see someone go to prison. It is not good enough to say, sort of throw our hands up like all of these scandals that we've had, from infected blood to the post office. We can't just throw our hands up and say how bad it is. People have to pay. People have to be punished.
I have no faith that they will, though, Jake. I think
and that's the problem, because this is what shatters people's trust and faith in institutions.
Completely.
You also think what's been going on at the BBC.
Deputy heads will roll is the motto of the BBC.
Yeah, exactly.
This cladding from this American company called Arconic, they have been accused in this report of deliberately concealing from the market the true extent of the danger of using Renault Bond 55PE in this cassette.
Yeah, but did they know at the time?
There had been fires using this product in 2012 in Dubai, 2013 also. Yeah. And yet it was still being sold and used in properties. We interviewed earlier Professor Margaret Heffernan, who wrote a book called Willful Blindness, and she's an expert on institutional failures, Jake. And she kind of talks about this sort of convergence of benefits, that there were various people in these chains for whom it's just easy. Just to keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, get your paycheck at the end of the month, don't raise awareness, don't be the whistleblower, don't point it out. How do you change that?
Well, we need a duty of candour, not just across our public sector, but our private sector as well. We can see all of these failings. We've named but 3 of them today. There clearly were people who knew about this, and they they are as guilty by their sort of collusion with the conspiracy of silence about it. That's a societal thing, a cultural thing. It can't just be by the government. But I think following these sort of 3 huge scandals coming in very close proximity to each other in terms of the reports about them, I think British attitudes are changing. I think people want to hear from the government and how we inject that duty of candour.
A pivotal moment, no question about it.
Well, I hope you're right, but how many times have we sat round following one of these reports and said, this is a pivotal moment, this is a sea change, things do not change?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever faced anything of this immensity, of this horror. We've had Hillsborough, we've had all sorts of incidents in the past. We've never had anything which actually goes to the heart of government, goes to the heart of governance, and it goes to the heart of accountability. And I think that's what's different about this.
Didn't the building regulators know about these dangerous substances being put on the side of buildings? Because don't we pride ourselves in this country as having the strongest building regulations in the world? We sometimes go to the continent and we see houses in Spain pulled down.
This report is criticising a failure of regulation.
So there was...
They should have known. National planning, local planning. There's lots of safeguards, aren't there?
So one of the criticisms of the coalition government between 2010 and 2015, there was some significant loosening of building regulations in terms of the inspection regime. And I think if people look at the report, they will see that's criticism. Talking about countries with laxer sort of planning regimes, I wouldn't name any companies because I don't know which ones it may be, that this cladding, which is now illegal in the United Kingdom, is being dumped around the world and sold off cheap in countries which have a laxer building regs regime.
Scandalous.
And again, if that is proven to be correct, I read it in a national newspaper, if that is proven to be correct, again, that is something that the government should act upon and say, if these products are unsafe in Britain or the United States, you can't just sell them to, Africa or China or any other continent.
Apparently, they're selling to Turkey, but how do we stop it?
Jake, I'm looking at some of this report. So the government's expert advisor in terms of building regulations, the Building Research Establishment,
BRE,
was apparently privatised in 1997, becoming a private company. It does beg the question whether an organisation like that should be a private company, because they will also have profit motives which may be corruptible in some way.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to read the report in detail, but I think it's all those sort of questions that this report will get to the bottom of. if it happened in 1997, I don't know whether it was Tony Blair's government or John Major's government.
Just before May.
Right. But
before Blair. Before Blair.
Yeah. Clearly, there is big criticism of the building regulations regime. I mean, to give people at home who are watching some comfort, who may have just moved into a brand new home, wherever it may be, there's been significant tightening up of the building regulation regime, quite correctly. And I'm sure that will continue under this Labour government.
Yeah. Well, it's we're having to draw the conversation to a conclusion here, but this has to be one of the worst institutional failings by government, local government, in our history.
It's certainly the worst in my lifetime that I'm aware of.
I think one of the problems we face now is that planning regulations are actually being loosened to encourage more building. Yeah. But building regs, because if you build a house, the local council has to give you two sorts of permission. You know, one is basic planning permission, and the other is building regulations. Yeah. And I think planning permission may well be loosened. Building regs, I think, will be tightened. And I think people should actually be speaking to the local councillors and the local council. What we need is the sunlight of disinfectant on this. We need to know what people are actually doing about it. We never again has to be our watchword.
OK, that was Stephen Pound, that was Mike Parry, that was Jake Berry. We're all going to come and see us again. Thank you all. Still to come, Sir Keir Starmer takes on Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions Day. What that's going to be about, I suspect, winter fuel and Labour's cruel decision, Stephen Pound, to take it off of pensioners like you.
I'm with Kemi Badenoch. I think it's a very, very sensible thing.
Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Sunshine and showers for most of us today. Some of those showers could be quite heavy across northwestern areas, but in any sunshine, it will still feel fairly warm. We've got high pressure building in for northern areas as we head towards the weekend, but before then, a number of weather fronts still bringing some outbreaks of rain throughout today. So across eastern areas, it will stay quite cloudy through a lot of today. There's a risk of some quite heavy showers breaking out in the southeast later on this afternoon. But elsewhere across southern areas of Scotland, we've already had some quite heavy showers today, and we could see some further heavy downpours later on this afternoon, as well as across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. So it is a fresher day than yesterday, but there will be some sunny intervals, and the winds are quite light, so it will feel pleasant enough if you do catch any sunshine. Now, as we head into this evening, still pretty cloudy across eastern areas of Scotland, some drizzly rain coming into parts of Aberdeenshire. Still a risk of some quite heavy showers further west, but generally that's where the best chance of any sunshine across parts of Scotland is later on today. And sunny spells across parts of Northern Ireland, as well as some heavy downpours. Now in Wales, the west coast is where we'll see the best of the sunshine. Further inland, a risk of some cloudier skies, and across the south coast as well, a mix of cloudy skies and outbreaks of rain. And it's overnight tonight across southern areas where that rain will start to turn quite heavy. There is a weather warning in force for all of Thursday. Now, the heavy rain will likely last all the way through Friday and into Saturday as well, actually. So we could see quite a lot of rain falling across southern areas. That may bring some trouble on the roads first thing on Thursday, but it's further north where things start to become more settled. So a drier night across parts of northwest Scotland, Northern Ireland, and a fine start to the day on Thursday across these areas. And there'll be plenty of sunshine too, and it'll feel fairly warm in that sunshine. Highs of around 21 or 22 degrees across western Scotland, northwestern England. Further south, though, much fresher and damper day.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850...
Well, we're going to go live to the Grenfell United press conference. This is relatives of the people who died in the Grenfell fire to get their reaction to the major report that's been released today.
Today marks the conclusion of a painful 6 years, listening to the advice that contributed to the deaths of 54 adults and 18 children. They were our loved ones, our neighbours and our friends. Today's report speaks to the lack of competence, understanding and fundamental failure to perform the most basic duties of care. We paid the price of systematic dishonesty, institutional indifference and neglect. The government ignored warnings about dangerous cladding from as early as 1991. It knew the risk but failed to prevent them, revealing the greed and profiteering of an industry that has been poorly regulated by governments over decades. It uncovers the systematic failings at the TMO and RBKC, which created a toxic, calculated culture which marginalised its residents. It shows the senior management at the London Fire Brigade knew about the risk of cladding fires but did nothing to prepare. But above all, the judge concludes what we already knew, that every single loss of life that night was avoidable. Human life was never a priority, and we lost friends, neighbours and loved ones in the most horrific way through greed, corruption, incompetence and negligence. The recommendations published today are basic safety principles that should already exist, highlighting how the government's role, duties and obligations have been hollowed out by privatisation. Where voids were created as the government outsourced their duties, Kingspan, Celotex and Arconic filled the gaps with substandard and combustible materials. They were allowed to manipulate the testing regimes, fraudulently and knowingly market their products as safe. Today, we send a message to Keir Starmer and his government. This country has been failed by governments of all political persuasions. Our expectation is your government will break old habits and implement all the recommendations made by Sir Martin Morbick's report without further delay, because the time to address this is already 3 decades too late. For the report to be worth anything, it must be and bring systematic change. To prevent another tragedy like Grenfell, your government needs to create something that doesn't exist. You must become a government with the power and ability to separate itself from the construction industry and corporate lobbying. A government that prioritises and tackles the glaring structural injustices and social and racial inequalities of the people you serve. You must now finally make this the turning point for Britain. To the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, it's now on to you to deliver justice, to bring charges to those culpable for the deaths of our loved ones. We would like to thank the public for their continuous support of the bereaved survivors and the Grenfell community. You were there for us when it happened. We ask for you to continue to stand with us, to stand for what's right and help us in holding those responsible to account. Finally, to the 54 adults and 18 children whose lives got cut short in the most violent way. We will never give up fighting for justice for you, and you will forever be in our hearts. Thank you.
Well, that was the Grenfell Tower families talking and their reaction to that official. We're back. It's the first Prime Minister's questions of this new parliamentary term. So Keir Starmer's only his second PMQs as Prime Minister.
Feels like it's been a lot longer than that, doesn't it? Olivia. Olivia and Gloria De Piero. There you are. Good to see you both. Right, how's it all going there? I guess you want questions from us?
We do. We want. We don't actually. We don't have time for you, I'm afraid. We're going to go straight to our viewers. This show is all about them. Please send us your questions to gbnews.com/yoursay.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. PMQ's Live starts right now. It is about to turn midday on Wednesday, the 4th of September. This is PMQ's Live on GB News with Gloria De Piero and Olivia Utley.
In just a moment, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak go head-to-head at Prime Minister's questions. We'll have full coverage of every moment, and we'll be getting reaction from Labour MP for Bolsover, Natalie Fleet, and Shadow Veterans Minister Andrew Bowie.
We'll go straight to the chamber just as soon